Good morning and welcome to everybody who has joined in from all parts of India and all parts of the world. I am Sahibnoor S Sidhu and I teach law at the Jindal Global Law School here in Sonipat near Delhi NCR. And I am absolutely delighted to welcome you to this celebratory panel discussion on the occasion of the Golden Jubilee of the Kesavananda Bharati versus Union of India judgment. The backdrop to the judgment itself, and its subsequent implications have been discussed in various on various scholarly platforms by a large number of Indian and international scholars. The aim of today's panel, of course, is slightly different. The aim of today's panel is to look into the theory and as well as the use of constitutional law theory to bring out this basic structure doctrine, how it has been expanded, how it has been used, how it has also been politicized and borrowed by other countries. And to do that, we have what I believe is the dream team. We of course start with Professor Upendra Baxi, and follow with a panel discussion amongst Professor Sarbani, Professor Aparna, Chandra, Dr. Gautam, Bhatia. I think I would be a fool to attempt and introduce each one of their work, their achievements, their publications. Most of the people that I can see in the participants list today, I know follow them very religiously. And so, of course, they're constitutional law experts, prolific researchers, writers, speakers, and I think the only thing I can add their profiles is their immense kindness and generosity in joining us today at my invitation. And I think I will simply ask Professor Upendra Baxi to take over the metaphorical floor, so to say, and deliver his commencement address. Professor Baxi.
Thank you very much, Sahibnoor. Dear Professor Aparna Chandra, Sarbani Sen, Gautam Bhatia, Postgraduate of Ketan, and Vice John, other colleagues in the faculty of General, students and participants. I'm afraid you're going to suffer me for some time, but first of all, before suffering comes the greetings. And greetings are due to all you all for coming today, and to Sahibnoor for organizing this festival of discussion of views. A proud nation obviously will, in course of time, celebrate this day and this Golden Jubilee year of the Kesavananda Bharati decision, which was delivered on 24th of April. I believe this is period of Amrit Kal, so that Golden Jubilee and Amrit Kal coincide very well. And I did say when, as far back as 1974, that Kesavananda Bharati, I wrote about it, constitutional quicksand, is the constitution of the future. And I'm not in the business of prophecy. But if this was a prediction of things to come, this has turned out happily right. And I'm glad to acknowledge my own view. Why did I say that this was the constitution of the future? Of course, I qualified it by saying next only in importance to the text of the Constitution of India. Why did I say that? Because I have read the case by now 22 times. Better things to do in life than reading cases. But I'm a bookworm. At that time, I read about 6 times. And I found that this is a treatise on jurisprudence and legal thought and legal philosophy. This is not only a case. This speaks to the very idea and foundations of constitutionalism. And it upsets me very greatly that my colleagues and some of my, most of my colleagues and most of my students when I was teaching, because the length of the decision or some other reason, they were put off by this decision. Some were put off because they believed in something called parliamentary sovereignty, which I think is the other basic structure, and hopefully not a significant other, to use some old languages. So I think it is important to read cases. If law teachers and law students don't read cases, who will? Who else will in society? Not the political actors, they're too busy leading the nation or the state. There isn't a pull. Not social scientists, excepting in passing. Not humanities, even though we may talk about law and literature occasionally in law school, it's a good thing. But normally, nobody else, excepting lawyers, judges, and legal academics and law students or law persons generally, read cases. Lawyers read it for a different purpose. They don't use it, read it for any theory of the case, but what's the cash value of the precedent. So they read differently than should lawyers, than legal academics and legal scholars, legal law students. Who should read the case for understanding? Now, 1,000 pages of Kesavananda are very difficult to read. On the 24th, I'm talking about locating this case in the light of NJSC case, and is next only exceed Kesavananda Bharati in its size. The majority opinion is 500 pages. So Kesavananda was 999 or something, 1,000 pages, depending on which law reporter you're using. So I would believe that Kesavananda and its normative progeny, that is Indira Gandhi versus Radnarayan, 76, Bommai, Nagaraj, all the way to NJSC and then the latest decision in 2023 called Janhit versus Union of India on economic reservation. There are 7 or 8 and Coelho, and there are 7 or 8 basic cases that have followed the basic structure, expanded it, questioned it, took different interpretations, said and different ancestral truths, to which I'll come about the time. But I, first of all, that's my first point. I've got about 3 or 4 points. And Sahibnoor will tell me when 5 minutes before my time, so I can wind up. There are 10 contributions that follow this decision of Kesavananda Bharati. And let me just summarily indicate them. One is a break function on Article 368. It applied constitutional discipline of breaks on extravagant use or profligate use of amending power. And I think it has very nearly shown that the spirit and letter of Constitution is safer than who march up and down India to save democracy with the court. So that's the first point. The second point is that for will of war, the Kesavananda and has accomplished through its progeny a fundamental idea, namely the idea of co-governance of the nation. Whether one likes it or not, I'm not talking at all about politics, which I don't understand and I respect very much, because without politics, there can't be democracy. This much I'll learn. And therefore, wars and all, political actors and policy actors are as important in democracy as judges. But just as judges don't decide by election result, but by looking at internal dialogue of precedent, law students and law teachers ought to take as far as possible an apolitical view of the judgments. Politics makes it very easy when teachers and students take a particular line of in national policy, then they're liberated from reading actual cases and the discourse. I'm an old-fashioned man, I'm posted now. I am already thinking of post-Baxi era in legal education, which is awaiting my mortality, but I hope it's sooner than that. Essentially, the accomplishment of co-governance of the nation, good or bad, has happened. And I think it's a good for democracy as a whole and good for constitutional. So there might be different views. Third, protecting and policing federalism, which in the case of Bombay, where there was no constitutional amendment. There was a precedence rule that was imposed, as you know, for, and this is difficult, but still true, lessening political repression, whether on caste lines, class lines, or gender lines, or disability and discrimination lines. For example, take SAL, social action litigation, which is different from public interest litigation. I keep on saying so, but nobody notices. India is a wonderful country, by the way, where you have a right to speak, but nobody has a duty to listen. That may be, but SAL and sexual minorities, for example, are an example of lessening political repression. 6, and this is difficult, but must be said, arresting slow democide. Democide is the term of the so-called equivalent in public speech is murder of democracy or rape of democracy. These expressions are loosely used. But democide is an expression which stands for decreasing or a processes of de-democratization of the nation. They have been with us since the institutionalized of democracy, since constitutional assembly debate. It's not a new thing. It's not a present. I don't live in the present. I live in the flow of events from 1950 onwards. The Constitution is the flow of events and decisions and actions since 1950. So the democidal can be counter politics, extremist politics, geopolitics. Democide is a wide term, or could be national or regional politics. And basic structure stands in way of that slow democide. 7, generating a new agenda for political and social action. And you can see this, we're hearing this discussion in the court, live streaming, as it's called, I think. Of all the courts, you can switch off the button, the mouse, whatever it is. You can see, for example, agenda setting function of courts will become very important. Whether it's sexual minorities' rights, see the hearing today nowadays of right to marry or marriage equality in the Supreme Court, and live broadcast of that is putting things on agenda of action and taking action sometimes. Inventing new rights. That is next point, 7 or 8. Article 21 today and Article 21 day before are different animals altogether. Good or bad judgment. Poet William Coleridge wrote an essay on poetry, and he said, literary criticism or enjoyment of poetry consists in the art of suspension of reality, art of suspension of judgment. You can't enjoy a poem if you are judging the poem at the same time, or a film song, or anything, music, whatever you're doing. The suspension of the judgment is an experience which is different from a different experience from where the judgment already operates. They're two different things. Willing, his praise was not the judgment, willing suspension of disbelief. Unless you're prepared to suspend willingly the sense of disbelief, you can't enjoy much of literature. The same is true, I think, about law and about Kesavananda Bharati. Coining new jurisdiction, 142, curative jurisdiction. Finally, new technologies of constitutional statutory interpretation and constitutional construction. I don't know why this difference is made, by the way, between statutory interpretation and constitutional construction. As if construction is higher, lower than interpretation. I don't know, but that's what the English people say, and we follow it. I don't see a single article questioning that distinction or worrying about the distinction. And finally, ending judicial feudalism. Already the courts of Himachal Pradesh and Rajasthan have issued circulars, for example, saying that we should abolish the expression lower courts or subordinate courts, although the Constitution uses it. It said, the resolution says the instead of subordinate courts, we should call them district courts. My preference is grassroots courts. But you can have your take. Now, the 10 features have flowed after the basic structure decision Kesavananda Bharati was made. Now, some of us want to say that this may or may not be a direct result of Kesavananda Bharati. I think it's an open question. But I read these 10 features, which are just narrated, as very important contribution flowing from Kesavananda Bharati and very often caused by Kesavananda Bharati. Now, of course, flowing from and causation are two different things, so related but different things. And one can take one's pick. But one has to reason out. So this is a broad context in which the court has constituted to constitutionalism. We might have this or that view of this or that particular judgment, and we are all outcome happy, so we might want to see whether the reasoning, what is the outcome? An outcome is reasoning plus result. If the outcome is one that points to the north and reasoning points to the south, there is no judgment. So I'm still waiting for judgment in Olga's case, for example. Not everything that the court says is judgment. A judgment is a unity of reason and result, in my opinion. Humble that it might be. People have humble opinions, no? So humble opinion. I'm a postmodernist, and in postmodernism, humility is not a virtue. So you might have different views on this. But the difference of views does not take away from the fact that there is a reason discourse. The judges have labored, the lawyers have labored, they've heard of days and all kinds of arguments, and they've produced, I might say, even monstrosities by way of judgment of 1,000 pages, 2,000 pages. Maybe. But we must respect the labor that is going into invested in the judgment. I think. It doesn't matter what your views are. The fact that somebody else has put in effort to analyze the arguments on both sides, heard them patiently, and written a judgment. And mind you, these judges are on a short tenure. You never know, because before you open your eyes, there are different sorts of judges. They rotate. So Pareto and Mosca idea of democracy, which was in the 18th century, that circulation of elites, circulation of judicial elites is greater than circulation of business elites or circulation of political elites. So very often we say democracy, we are representing the people, we are the voice of people. Well, it is factually, Pareto and Mosca said to great political scientists of the 18th, 19th century, they said democracy consists of circulation of elites. So this is, I would now leave that point. Going back to ancestral truths, my second major contribution is the great idea. If you ask where did the rights come from, on one answer would be Constitution. Then you ask where does the Constitution get the rights from? Some would say International Declaration of Human Rights. Where does it come from? And you peel the onion and you ask question from kahan se aaya, kahan se aaya, kahan se aaya. Then some people answer this question by saying, oh, tradition se aaya hai. Magna Carta se aaya. Magna Carta kahan se aaya? मैं कहता हूँ Lord Cook से आया. A short map of tyrants. I still remember James I was the king who succeeded Elizabeth in Britain, 16th century. Late 16th century, early 17th century. This was developed between Cook and James, which I hope people outside those teaching legal history would know about and worth knowing about. King James described judges as, and I quote, shadows and ministers of the divine order of kingly office. Cook replied, and actually it's Cook, pronounced as Cook, although it's written as Cook. English is a very, not my mother tongue, but if it were, I would more justify in saying that it's a very funny language. Cook replied that the king, and I quote, the king in his own person cannot adjudge any case, which should only be decided by court of law. James said, well, I thought, he said, the law was founded on reason. And I have reason like judges have. But my reason to get away because I'm the king and you are not. You remember the famous line that President Trump uttered in the press conference? He said the difference between the two of us lies in the fact that I'm the president of US and you are not. It still continues. Dialogue of power with justice never ends. Conflicts within that are resolved. So what did Cook say? He said, God had endowed his majesty. Mind you, the days of divine right of king. God had endowed, they say in the past, will now behave as monarchical. God had endowed his majesty, I quote, with excellent science and great endowments of nature. But his majesty was not learned in the causes which concern the life of law, which for the sake of time I would abbreviate, only comes out of learning the law patiently over decades by reading and by analyzing precedents. So, and then Cook uses the phrase, He said the law comes from the artificial reason and not the natural reason. Natural reason we all have. Why do you go to law school? Why does Jindal probably work? Ranking or whatever, as Indian law. Why does the national law schools are supposed to be oases in result of legal education? Yeah, I studied law in government law college in Bombay. And I studied law very indifferently, 2-year course. Probably I'm worse for it than Jindal alumni of National Law School. But probably I'm also not too bad, really on. Many of the lawyers and judges have substandard so-called legal education. But they're doing pretty well, they're judges, lawyers. It's interesting to study how much background in legal education there compared to what Jindal gives or National Law School give. Compared to that, how much legal education, what law did they learn, how did they learn it, compared to us in high ranking, global ranking index or institutions of eminence, that kind of thing. Anyway, so Cook said the artificial reason. Now, artificial reason of law provides the ancestral truth of law, going far back in time. So I think I will not give you other examples like Lord Sarbani or a judgment on Damodar Das or Gopal Chandra Das in 1884, where their lordship said, and Justice Muhammad, the great Indian judge, who gave an opinion there, and the other lordship agreed. That concerns section 52 or something of the Civil Procedure Code. I won't go into detail. But there they said that a judicial review is of the essence of section 52. That whatever the court thinks fit, just and equitable is the real thing in deciding whether the plaintiff has a valid claim or not. I won't go into all these cases. The point simply was about ancestral truths. That you can view rights as coming from a whole tradition before you, spanning generations, even centuries. The source of embedding of rights in a legal system is not today, not present. So Kesavananda builds on this ancestral truths. And in fact, when you look at the opinions in Kesavananda Bharati, describing the basic structure and essential features, you see the importance of ancestral truths. They go quite far back. And I'll later in my conclusion, I'll say how they should go even further back. Now, I'm going out of my time already. Now, I will not, I'll jump quickly to Nagraj. And Nagraj was a case decided in 2006. It was decided by whom? It was decided for whom? For the lawyers. What was the social economic standing of the litigants, lawyers, and judges? What was their class and political background? What argumentative strategies were presented before them? What did they argue? Then he explicit or disguised dissent. These are some of the questions one must always ask when looking at the case, because that's exactly what happened. We don't even know the names of lawyers when we read a case. We don't study the arguments, we flip through, we are ratio hunters par excellence. We go to what the court decided. But the court comes to a decision after a long process. of judicial reasoning. And skipping and hopping is not reading. It's just skipping and hopping. Don't dignify it with the word reading in case. My heart breaks when I read some of the National Law School journals. Every college is a flagship journal. And only politeness prevents me from saying nasty things about some of the things I've read. There are some exceptionally good things, but most of the time the judgments are not read. Only head notes are read. And head notes are not judgments. So anyway, this was 2006 that Nagaraj was decided. And I'm not going to substance of reservation policy and all that is important in itself. There are 3 amendments to the Constitution, and Nagaraj was considering those amendments. I will not go there. I'm not going to the problem of potential or dissent, which is very important. I'll not go there. I'll simply go to the one asked, because there is lack of time. Because it's not my subject is not reservation, and also there is lack of time. I'll simply say there was a paradigm shift from Kesavananda Bharati. Kesavananda Bharati said the basic structure and essential features are to be found in the provisions of the Constitution. Nagaraj says something quite different. It says they are not to be found in provisions of the Constitution. Not at all, they don't say, but not so much, they say, as the principles of the Constitution. For example, they say somewhere, the Deepak Mishra says, Deepak Mishra others say, first of all, they say, a very important observation which goes a little beyond Kesavananda, I think, original text. They say, first, that fundamental rights are not a gift of the state to its citizens. It's excellent. It's not an anarchist speaking. This is not Naxal speaking. The Chief Justice of India, who has sworn an oath, all the judges take an oath. We are unoath academics. Not that we should take oath, but they're different matter. Third schedule, to uphold the unity and integrity of India and to do justice without fear of favor. These are this step speaking. Individuals possess basic human rights by virtue of belonging to human race. Because they're human beings, therefore they have rights. Certain core rights like dignity, liberty, etc. I won't elaborate on this. Second, they say fundamental rights, separate apart, does not alone lay down fundamental rights. The other things we should look at. Thirdly, they say what you must look at is principles. I'm skipping and hopping a lot here, although I'm against skipping and hopping a lot in judgment, but it's not enough time. They say, just to give you a glimpse of what Nagaraj said, paradigm shift. It says the principle of Bommai is nowhere, they protest is nowhere written in the Constitution. What's the principle there? It's not a constitutional amendment that the lordship will consider. If the action by the president of imposing precedence rule on a particular group of states. Principle of federalism is nowhere written in the Constitution. So movement from provisions to principle. Same, Bommai is very good, and that's even Reddy, I think, quotes 6 features of constitutional secularism expounded by one person, Upendra Baxi, in an article. And he quotes verbatim those 6 features of constitutional secularism. And he says, and the first time the Supreme Court uses the word constitutional secularism comes there. In other words, secularism comes with a principle. There's no one or the other provision that says, they might say, but it is a principle that of secularism. Similarly, principle of republic. My senior Attorney General Laftari used to say, I like the word republic because there's a pub in it. PUB. But that doesn't matter. In the morning, too early to talk about pubs, I think. Otherwise, you have a jurisprudential hangover. So I won't go into this. Now, in everything, socialism, secularism, democracy, republicanism, the words of which we ember are principles. And principles are parts of law, as much as provisions are part of law. So basic structure begins to be a matter of principles which are coherent, which give coherence to the Constitution itself. The foundations of the Constitution, search for foundation. Basically, no doubt, search for foundation. Essential features is the search for foundations, but both are in turn based on the idea of principles, not of rules. Now, those who jurisprudence will readily understand the great debate between John Austin Herbert Hart and between Herbert Hart and Ronald Dworkin. I skipped the first bit, debate between Hart and Austin, who said habits of obedience, and Hart said rule, union of primary and secondary rules, but the rules are the same. Rule of recognition. Law is a system of rules, and there's a lot of jurisprudence literature on that. And Dworkin said law is a body of principles. So it is there for people. If you see it, it is there, it lips with the eye when you read the judgment. If you're a law teacher, a law student. But we have the silos. He's a jurisprudence teacher, say the constitutional law teacher, I'm an intellectual property person. We specialize too early in life. And what is specialism? Cultivated ignorance of other parts. I met a doctor, I sit for a long time, and he said, you come to the right person. Suddenly, well, I extension there. I said, why did I come to the right person? He said, I'm Podres. I said, I'm sorry, the word is new for me. Podres is a foot doctor, foot doctor. But I'm a left Podres. My swelling was in left foot. So he doesn't know anything about. I said, is there any different doctor between right foot and left foot? I said, I don't know anything about left foot. I don't know. I specialize only in left foot. I don't know about right foot. So that's specialization, narrowing down, blinkers. So I think essentially jurisprudence and constitutional law are brought together by Kesavananda Bharati and his project. You cannot study constitutionalism without studying jurisprudence. And my favorite judgments are Justice Begin Kesavananda, Justice Matthew Kesavananda, and Justice Vedi. These 3 judgments which are all in minority at that time, so if you can find a majority for that. But majority, Kesavananda complicates this idea of majority and minority, but there are part, and it is a complicated idea itself. Regardless, these are my favorite judgments. So my submission today, and I end with this, is to say that a great shift has occurred in Nagaraj at a normative level in understanding basic structure. And finally, my last point, which we said in breathless hurry, is that when I taught in Delhi Law School centuries ago, it seems, I used to say there's nothing fanciful about basic structure. And I used to give them a simile of striptease. In a striptease, the sense is you sexualize, desexualize the entertainment or communication, performance, certain parts of your body. But at the end of it, when you shut down everything, there's something called the last garment, which you don't shed and put your hands over it. Man or woman. Last garment, that last garment is basic structure. Basic structure. Essential features you said. So difference between basic structure is judicial independence and judicial review. Those people talk about overreaching judges' case, the judges appointing judges, and it's absolutely nonsense. You cannot have unless there is a judicial independence, you cannot identify articulate what essential features are. In order to speak about essential features, there must be an independent judiciary and an independent legal profession, independent from the state and the market. So I make it I say basic structure is constitutional judicial review process power, CJR, constitutional judicial review. And once you grant that, then comes essential features for which judges themselves are conflicted. When democracy and rule of law is about whether X is an essential feature, X then is violated, is all a matter of internal discourse. And what to do if it is violated? Not all violation of essential feature are necessarily violation of basic structure. So we must, when there are two phrases used, we must at least know inquire why these two phrases are used. So I've said nothing that you do not know, and I've taken a long time. I apologize for that, and I'll now shut up. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Professor Baxi. I'm sure that nobody wanted you to shut up, to use your words. I think the more we listen to you, the more we want to listen to you. But yes, I do agree that there are a lot of amazing points to come in from the panel discussion as well. But thank you so much, sir. And with that, as I think the most amazing commencement address that I've ever heard, I will now invite our panel discussants, Professor Sarbani Sen, Professor Aparna Chandra, and Dr. Gautam Bhatia. Now, the way we will do this panel discussion is that I've prepared a few prompts by taking some leeway, and I will be posing those prompts to the panelists, post which they'll have roughly 10 to 15 minutes to respond to the prompt, followed by a discussion, a couple of points, suggestions, notes by the other panelists. So Dr. Bhatia, my prompt for you, sir, is that Professor Baxi has very eloquently gone over the trajectory that Kesavananda Bharati judgment and the doctrine of basic structure, essential features has had since that judgment, reaching up to Nagaraj. But I wanted to request you to sort of go back a little in the past, because there is a lot of discussion which has restarted about whether Golaknath and its sort of more encompassing prohibition on amending or abrogating the fundamental rights was a better approach. So there are a few scholars recent times who've argued that Golaknath was clearer, that it provided a very clear separation of the status of the fundamental rights to a very highly protected class of provisions, and that the politics, the haste that came with the processes of the Kesavananda Bharati judgment might have muddled the waters. If you would oblige me, would you mind going back to Golaknath, discussing a little bit about Golaknath and how it was different from Kesavananda Bharati, and which, in your opinion, is better, or was better, or would have been better for the protection of fundamental rights? Over to
Yeah,
you, Dr.
thanks.
Bhatia.
I wasn't aware of this controversy that Golaknath is apparently better written judgment or a better judgment than Kesavananda, and I'm quite surprised to hear about it because I don't think Golaknath is defensible on any stretch. It isn't defensible textually. It's very obvious that as a matter of text, the Constitution, Article 368 says that you can amend any part of the Constitution. That is clear. It's indefensible conceptually because if there's any justification for a restriction upon the amending power, it has to come from a theory that deals with the distinction between constituent power and secondary power and legislative power, which is obviously not there in Golaknath. And thirdly, as consequentially, it's if you think about it, if the Golaknath judgment was to hold, you would basically not be able to change any part of Part 3, and I mean like change, right? So progressive change. If you were to, for example, as happened, remove the right to property as a fundamental right from the Constitution, which is actually, I mean, it's a heavily debated issue in general. Should a Constitution guarantee a fundamental right to property? It's something that has consumed debates in countries like South Africa, where the whole point has been that one of the reasons why you had a Constitution was to engage in land reform and reverse many histories of inequitous land distribution. And so when the Indian Constitution, when the Parliament eliminated the right to property as a fundamental right, under the Golaknath doctrine, you couldn't do that because you're basically frozen Part 3 in time for eternity. And then things, for example, like the introduction of Article 16.4a and 16.4b, which were discussed in Nagaraj. Now, you may think it's an unwise step to take. You may disagree with things like the carry forward or the catch-up rule. The fact remains that that is Parliament's prerogative if it wants to constitutionalize, certain aspects of reservations in the Constitution. So again, a permanent freeze on altering any part of the Constitution, the text of it, is from all angles, to me, seems quite a surprising proposition. Kesavananda Bharati is a better, if the objective is to preserve the fundamentals of the Constitution from basically parliamentary authoritarianism, right? In that case, Kesavananda Bharati is obviously a better option for many reasons. First of all, it grounds in the majority, most of it, grounds the opinion in text. So the core argument is that amend, what the word amend means. The word amend does not mean a wholesale repeal or a wholesale abrogation, right? And that's why you need to have, from there you get the idea of constitutional identity, that it is when you, through amendment, seek to permanently alter constitutional identity, or in the words of the Kesavananda Bharati judgment, damage or destroy the basic structure. That is where the court steps in, and that's where, and the textual basis is that there's no longer an amendment in any genuine sense. Again, conceptually, it draws a distinction, or the effect of it is to draw a distinction between the primary constituent power, which is the power to make or remake constitutions, which is distinct from changing or amending a constitution, and to introduce the idea that there are certain kinds of alterations in the constitutional text that in effect amount to the remaking or the making of a new constitution, which is something only the primary constituent power can do. So, and again, there may be disagreements over whether that's right or wrong, but if there is any defensible theory that allows for a court to invalidate a constitutional amendment, it has to be founded on an idea like this, which is what Kesavananda Bharati does. And of course, finally, it allows for a lot more play in the joints when it comes to the what Parliament can do with respect to Part 3, because And as we've seen over the years, in cases like Portial or cases of that kind, where to say incorporate Sikkim into the Indian Union, and in a way that is politically feasible, you have to do some things such as departing from the one person, one vote principle, given the specific sort of social, cultural history of Sikkim and the terms on which it exceeds the Indian Union. And that is something you would test on the ground of the basic structure. And it allows for that kind of fluidity or play in the joints where those things can happen, which a more rigid judgment like Golaknath does not allow for. And over the years, I think we've seen that the success of the basic structure doctrine in part lies in the rarity with which it is used, and which it is wielded. And often the use of it is not to strike down a constitutional amendment, but as in Bomai's case, the use is a more expressive use, that invokes basic structure in contexts that don't involve the actual striking down of an amendment. Now, you can imagine, on the other hand, had the Golaknath doctrine been held sway, the number of strike downs over the years that would have happened, and you can well imagine the political backlash that would have come from that. It would just have been completely unenforceable, right? So as I said, and I have really never come across this debate that Golaknath was better, or the Golaknath should be resuscitated. And I think for good reason. It's very clear that judgment, and again, no other, unless a nation's constitution specifically entrenches textually, a certain parts of the constitution beyond the amending power, which is very rare, then yes, that part will be beyond the amending power. But even in countries that have adopted the doctrine in some variant or the other, it's not. They've not really gone for saying X or Y set of provisions can never be changed. It's more that there are values or principles that are articulated in a range of provisions, and when an amendment attempts to effectively nullify a principle or a value that comes across or comes through multiple provisions, then that is the problem. And you can also see this thing of the reverse side, and I'll end with this. In the Indira Gandhi case, right, there wasn't an amendment to Part 3. It was Article 329A, Clause A, Subclause 4. The damage that amendment did to the constitutional structure was immense. It effectively insulated one person's election from judicial scrutiny. It was effectively a bill of attainder in a constitutional form. And had the Golaknath ruling been there, it's not Part 3, so it's fair game. Whereas Kesavananda actually gives you the tools you need to understand that you actually can completely eviscerate the constitution by amending something outside of Part 3. So I think that for all these reasons, of course, the reasoning in Kesavananda Bharati is obviously open to disagreement, discussion. Should it have been implied limitations in a majority or not? All of that. But if you compare the two, I think it's very clear that any judgment or any doctrine that involves the court striking down amendments has to be extremely restrained and has to operate at a level of abstraction that judgment achieves. So I think those are my views on this particular debate.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bhatia. Professor Chandra?
No, I have nothing further to add, except saying I completely agree with everything that Gautam has said. I would say I understand where the judges in Golak, at least the majority judges in Golaknath, were coming from, even if I don't agree with that judgment. And they were concerned about evisceration of the fundamental rights chapter. And it may be a question of, constitutional design, that our constitution, though it calls the fundamental rights chapter fundamental, seems to suggest that it is on a higher pedestal. Ultimately, in 368, does not even put it in the proviso, right? And in fact, in Shankari Prasad, which precedes Golaknath, and which is being reviewed in Golaknath, the one of the judges, I'm forgetting who, but one of the judges does recommend to Parliament to amend 368 and put fundamental rights into the proviso. Make it a little bit more difficult to amend. Don't make it as easy as it otherwise is in the current constitutional scheme. But it's not beyond the amending power of Parliament. And again, you could think from a point of view of constitutional design that might have made sense, that there should be some control over amendment of fundamental rights, and shouldn't be as easy as a special majority in Parliament. Having said that, I mean, completely agree with Gautam's point that the way they went about doing that in Golaknath was problematic, because it wasn't supported by text. It would have had many other consequences, disastrous consequences, including the fact that we think very often that rights are the biggest protections of our things that we value as a polity. And this is, I'm guessing, where Gautam was also going with his last point, that it's very easy to hollow out the Constitution without touching Part 3 of the Constitution. And we are seeing that in the current political moment, where institutions are being hollowed out, institutions that are part of other parts of the Constitution are being hollowed out, structures such as federalism that is being hollowed out without actually any formal amendment. So to think that therefore you can protect things that we value only by protecting Part 3 is also perhaps a very naive view of whatever might have been the impulses that were driving the Golaknath judgment.
Right, Professor. No, I agree. Professor Sain, some concluding comments?
Actually, I think I'll wait for Professor Chandra to also make her submission, and then we can just kind of discuss both all three of our presentations. So I'll just hold on to my questions.
No issues. Yes. So I was going to come next to Professor Chandra, and Professor, sort of building on what you just mentioned, there seems to be a political mobilization to question, to challenge the judicial supremacy that has been established via the practice of the Supreme Court. I often hear these utterances by different ministers and different chairmen of different committees and houses that, the parliament is the sovereign, that India is a parliamentary sovereign, and that to me seems like a very problematic issue, especially when we think about the limits that are important on that kind of sovereign power, be it the parliament's own power or be it the people's power that is exercised via the parliament. And so do you foresee a dilution of the basic structure doctrine? Do you see any way in which that this doctrine could be strengthened against possible future political / constitutional damages or attacks? And I think I would want to sort of base this more in the context of what I would like to say, the positivist need to locate sovereignty. So who is the sovereign, who is supreme, and is there a chance that we might lose the basic structure doctrine, or that it might be diluted given the political will to do so?
Thanks for that question, Sahibnoor. I'll take seriously Professor Baxi's comment that prophesizing the future is a fool's errand. So having said that, I have some concerns with the basic structure doctrine, particularly in the present political moment. And this comes from a sense that I think we've not lived up to it's not so much a fundamental disagreement with the basic structure doctrine as a sense that we've not lived up to the potential of Kesavananda Bharati and the potential of the basic structure doctrine. And what I mean is this, that the basic structure doctrine is at a level of abstraction, and it needs to be, for all the reasons that Gautam already mentioned, to allow for a lot of room to play with for Parliament. But the fear that I see is not so much of a replacement of the basic structure doctrine, or setting up a 15-judge bench to strike down the basic structure doctrine or something of that, overturn Kesavananda Bharati, but of a hollowing out of the basic structure doctrine from within, right? So again, Professor Baxi was talking about Dworkin in principle-based adjudication. Dworkin also makes a distinction, as have many others, between concepts and conceptions. So secularism, for example, is a concept that can bear many different conceptions. And we might all agree that secularism is part of the basic structure of the part of the basic structure of the Constitution. But which conception of it is part of the basic structure of the Constitution? My sense is that is where we're moving, where you could imagine that we are all talking within the framework of the Constitution and constitutional values and constitutional principles, but we are completely talking past each other and saying absolutely different things, because our understanding of what secularism requires might be quite different. So, for example, if you look at the Bommai case that's already been referenced, and you look at the concept of secularism there, as opposed to one of the judgments in the hijab case before the Supreme Court, and the concept of secularism there are absolutely in tension with each other. Both are invoking the basic structure of the Constitution to say that secularism is a constitutional value. If you look at the concept of equality, substantive equality, even in Nagraj, and I have a range of problems with Nagraj, but its understanding of substantive equality is not per se, at least at the theoretical level, is not particularly a problem, as compared to, say, the EWS judgment and some of the judgments in the some of the opinions in the EWS judgment, which think of substantive equality as requiring the law to be caste neutral, right? And they read that as part of the basic structure requirement for equality, right? So you can say that equality is part of the basic structure doctrine, but and that it should govern not just constitutional amendments, but it should govern all actions of any state official, so be it the executive, be it the legislature and legislating. But what do you really mean by the basic structure, right? What do you mean by these concepts that we all agree are part of the basic structure? My fear is that we're moving towards hollowing out and a capture, or at least there's a fear that we'll see a capture of these concepts, right? And when this gets linked to the unamendable part of the Constitution, if these concepts get captured and they're unamendable, they're part of constitutional identity, then the battles that we are already seeing in the political domain on what India's constitutional identity really is, I fear is already seeping into judicial discourse on what India's constitutional identity is. Is it a civilizational state, and therefore the constitutional identity is linked to India's civilizational ethos? Is it a transformative constitution linked to a more progressive ethos, which rejects and repudiates parts of our our history? What is India's constitutional identity? It's at that level of abstraction that it's open to capture. And if to the extent that our institutions are being hollowed out, I have a fear that you'll see that hollowing out coming into through judicial discourse into the basic structure as well. Obviously, that assumes that there is normative content already and in basic structure, and this kind of a hollowing out is a hollowing out, right? And people who take a different view of India's constitutional identity are likely to say that no, that is the true meaning of India's constitutional identity. We are the ones who got it wrong so far. I mean, so the political debates that we are having are likely to happen at the level of the basic structure doctrine. So I don't see that, I don't see that we are getting rid of the basic structure doctrine anytime in the near future. I have a fear that that the basic structure doctrine is likely to get deployed in ways that many of us might think is a betrayal of Kesavananda Bharati. Why is that possible? That is possible, and this is the point I was making at the beginning, because we've not, I don't think, lived up to the promise of Kesavananda Bharati. We are not clear. Professor Baxi was mentioning, whether the basic structure resides in provisions or in principles, and the courts have gone back and forth on that. The method of engaging in basic structure in both the determination of what counts as basic structure, but how do you engage with basic structure, right? The method of judicial review of based on basic structure is not something that we've been clear about. Pratap Mehta once said, I remember reading somewhere, that judges generally engage with basic structure in the form of saying, you know it when you see it, right? Rather than any sort of grounding in any sort of defensible method. And what it also allows, and and I'll end with this, in the context of judicial power, it allows judges to hide behind vague generalities rather than sort of more defensible reasons in articulating their or in taking positions in judgments, right? So again, very often you see, oh, X is part of the basic structure and therefore we are deciding in a particular way. How does that link, the idea that something is part of the basic structure, how does that link to the provision that you are interpreting to or engaging with, to the specific dispute at hand before you? Some of these can be eclipsed by just invoking the language of the basic structure. And in the NJAC judgment, for example, moving from judicial independence as part of the basic structure, which perhaps is a fairly anodyne statement, to saying primacy of the judiciary in judicial appointments is therefore part of the basic structure of the Constitution and is unamendable feature of the Constitution, is a big shift. But that's something that the court hides behind, the basic structure doctrine to make that kind of a shift. So that's, I think, another problem of this hollowing out or not having any kind of sort of rigorous method of engaging with the doctrine of basic structure. So these I see as more immediate problems. I fear that there is actually no need for a political dispensation that's not comfortable with the current constitutional framework to replace the basic structure doctrine, because it can just occupy the basic structure doctrine.
Thank you so much, Professor. That's both enlightening and also slightly scary, if I may add. But I think I would want to invite Dr. Bhatia and sort of help me reconcile the requirement of fluidity in the doctrine with also some amount of basic objective criteria, so that it helps us understand and predict where this doctrine would be applicable, and also sort of helps us hold the judiciary accountable when they don't do it, and so that they cannot, as Professor Chandra very, very eloquently put, they cannot hide behind the generality of the doctrine. So how do you reconcile the requirement for fluidity with the requirement for some kind of method?
Yeah, I think that it's obviously like a difficult task, in that, as any interpretive task is difficult, but also it is also fairly it's not undoable. So it's the distinction that Aparna drew between concepts and conceptions, right, is the helpful one here, because as we discussed, you obviously have a concept of equality in the Constitution, which has potentially different conceptions. And while Parliament through amendment can potentially tweak the various conceptions that are there, what it can't do is come up with something that is not recognizable as equality at all, which is what it did in the Nehru Gandhi versus Rajnarayan, right? So literally, like, taking one person and exempting them from a certain set of like rules applicable to everybody else is an example of something that, under no comprehensible definition of equality, is compliant with equality, which makes, in that case, the judge's task easier, right? EWS case is interesting because there, I think, it actually was a much closer issue, right? So there was clearly a certain idea of equality that was there in the Constitution, a certain conception, which the EWS amendment was seeking to alter. Right, so from equality as reparations, reparations as equality, to structural sort of like structural disadvantage, mitigating that as being the demands of equality, to a somewhat more conception of equality that was individual focused, that ignored the ascriptive characteristics based on group affiliation that had historically been sources of disadvantage, right? So that move was made, and I think it was a close question of whether that is something that is permissible under the basic doctrine or not. And in that case, the court, in fact, and on this point, all 5 judges upheld the amendment. The part that 2 of them struck down was just the exclusion of SC/ST category from the amendment. They all agreed that it was actually open to Parliament to through amending process to actually introduce a recognizable conception of equality that wasn't yet there in the Constitution, right? And I think that is something that, I mean, of course, can be debated, but it is something that the court, it can do it. It's not that the court is acting egregiously or acting in a way that is indefensible if that is the basis of its judgment. So I think in that sense, the fluidity of the basic structure doctrine inevitably will lead to amendments that you may not like, but which are compliant with the basic structure. And I think the answer there is not to then look to the courts to be the saviors every time, because when you're looking at a weapon like the basic structure, or a shield, so to say, weapon might be a wrong word, a shield, part of its efficacy lies in the fact that it's actually used rarely. And if you keep using it all the time, then it is going to lose, what makes it the sort of like last ditch sort of like thing the court does to say, okay, even an amendment is something that's striking down. And so in that case, I think in where you have fluidity causing problems and leading to amendments you don't like, then the answer is not going to be with the courts. It has to be elsewhere in other processes. Decentering the court from like, the role as protecting the Constitution or protecting constitutional values. So I'd say that is what it is. And I think the associated point is, of course, that the Supreme Court's deployment of the shield has been very cynical in history, right? So it somehow always remembers to deploy the shield when its own power is under threat, right? So in some cases, yes, Indira Nehru Gandhi and Minerva Mills were actually about rebalancing the constitutional's, balance between, part 3 and part 4, all of that. But if you closely look at which part the court strikes down, it is that part that excludes judicial review, right? So it's that part that takes the court out of the equation. And that's the part that actually gets struck down. And later on, it becomes more blatant, right? The NJSC is an example of that. Now, again, I think the NJSC was unconstitutional for a number of reasons. But ultimately, the court's reason for striking it down, which is that judicial independence must at all times mean judicial primacy in selection, is not defensible under any idea of constitutional democracy. I mean, look at all other countries like judges, right? Like it's one thing to say the executive should not have dominance, right? That is a defensible principle of judicial independence. It's another thing to make the leap from there to that at all points it must be the judges who have the primacy. And if you look at judicial service commissions across the world in countries with thriving independent judiciaries, where courts actually often strike down stuff that goes against the government, unlike our court, their selection process is less dominated by the judiciary than ours is. So I think that one problem has been that the fluidity of the doctrine has now been deployed in a very obviously cynical way by the court, which of course is going to make it harder to defend, right? Because if the court somehow only steps in when it feels its own turf being threatened, then how do you make a principled defense of the doctrine when it seems to be applied only, in these cases? I think that's where that's the real danger. The doctrine gets delegitimized because the wielder is acting in self-interest very evidently and somehow fails to act in other cases. So I think that's the greater risk and not so much the fluidity of the doctrine.
I think we're going to move to Professor Sarbani Sen now, and with that we will also move the debate from India to sort of a global expanse. And so my question to you would be, Professor, that of course we know that there are those elements of judicial borrowing within the import, as some have identified, of the basic structure doctrine to India. But I think what Kesavananda Bharati did for India is also sort of to give us a doctrine which was exported out of India. And of course, this exportation is not just in terms of a blind sort of transposition, but they've engaged with it. Some judiciaries have accepted it. Some have accepted it with some amendments to the logic of the doctrine, and some have simply rejected it. But there is an immense amount of comparative constitutional law discourse that is based in the importation, exportation / different variations and modifications of this doctrine. I would just request you. I can see a lot of students from our classes in comparative constitutional law who are also here, and I think they would be very interested to know about this process. And of course, in the meanwhile, you may also respond to the other panelists' comments before.
Thanks so much, Sahibnoor. I'll kind of try to develop a trajectory of the doctrine. I'll try and kind of talk a little bit about the origins and the influences on the Indian judiciary, and then how it has kind of traveled outside. So because I need to, by looking at different jurisdictions, I need to go into the details. I can't avoid it into some of the judgments. So it might get a little kind of, extended, the time that is. So apologies for that in advance. I just thought that just for the sake of the students as well, to get a sense of what could be the foreign influences on the doctrine. A good place was an article that I came across, and actually Professor Baxi referred to it in his Bar and Bench article, the recent article as well. It's Monica Paulsen's article called The Basic Structure Doctrine and Its German and French Origins, A Tale of Migration, Integration, Invention, and Forgetting. She kind of starts by talking about two European constitutional lawyers, French and German, actually, Carl Schmitt and Maurice Horiot. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the name right, but those are the two European constitutional lawyers that she refers to. Just to give the students a sense of who these jurists might be. So Carl Schmitt, 1888 to 1985, was a conservative German legal, constitutional, and political theorist, and he's often considered to be one of the most important critics of liberalism, parliamentary democracy, and liberal cosmopolitanism. Maurice Horiot, 1856 to 1929, was a French political scientist and educator whose theoretical work on public law contributed to the development of French administrative law. So Paulsen states that these two lawyers developed the idea of implied constitutional limits on constitutional amendment at the start of the 20th century with two very different theoretical approaches. So Schmidt's theory of implied limits on constitutional amendment was based on a certain mystical concept of the constituent power. By contrast, Horiot argues in the tradition of the French philosopher Bessias and relied on the procedural approach, that the constituent power was to be exercised by a constituent assembly, and also on the idea that certain fundamental principles were higher law, and therefore they constituted a limitation on the amending and possibly also the framing of a constitution. So Peter Conrad, in his first article, Dieter Conrad, in his first article written after the Indian Supreme Court's decision in Goloknath, referred in particular to the German Weimar Constitution in Article 76, which also contained only formal limits on constitutional amendment, and he also referred to Carl Schmitt's works. So Conrad described the key contents of Schmitt's theory with the following words: that an amendment could not change the basic structure of the Constitution. Of course, neither the works of Schmitt nor Horiot are actually mentioned in the Kesavananda Bharati judgment. The judges only sometimes refer to Conrad's work. However, Paulsen feels that in analyzing the judgment, there is a certain crucial difference between Schmitt's perspective and the Indian basic structure doctrine, because the latter is clearly founded on what she calls the rule of law. So she says the rationale of the Indian basic structure doctrine seems to protect the core or identity of the Indian Constitution as a value in and of itself, and it guarantees democracy and individual freedom. Paulsen states that when Conrad was actually developing his theory of limited amendment powers by reference to Schmidt's works, he actually ignored those aspects of Schmidt that refers to the constitution destroying nature of his idea of constituent power. So he did not adopt Schmidt's mystical idea of an almighty constituent power, which was not subject to any kind of control at all. Instead, he actually recreated Schmidt's understanding of constituent power, and he argued for a rule of law-based understanding of constituent power, which Paulsen says is reflected in the judgment, Kesavananda Bharati judgment. So Paulsen argued that the idea of the basic structure doctrine in India, safeguarding the fundamental elements of a constitutional and democratic state, bears actually a higher degree of similarity to the theoretical approach of Horo, who also wanted to protect certain principles because of the structure of the constitutional and democratic system. And she feels that the similarity to Horo's thinking is apparent in the way that judges Shilleth and Grover, for instance, understand the constituent power. So they thought of the constituent power as an instituted power, which should be exercised by a specifically elected constitutional assembly. And they did not share Schmidt's idea of an almighty constituent power not subject to any kind of control. Paulsen also finds a link to Horo's idea that an amending power that is not organized as a constituent assembly should only have a limited right to amend the constitution. Paulsen also feels that the structural interpretation of the Indian constitution by Judge Sikri was also particularly close to Horo's ideas. Like Horo, Sikri relied on the assumption that the content of a constitution could also be derived from the scheme of the constitution itself, and he then justified the limited scope of Parliament's amending power on the basis of the structure and content of the Indian constitution. So this kind of is an interesting kind of understanding, I feel, that Paulsen puts forward, because we kind of think of any foreign influences on the Indian basic structure doctrine primarily in terms of Conrad's work, and through him to Schmidt, we kind of make that kind of a link. But Paulsen here puts forward a different idea of the constituent power and ties it to the French tradition, Horo and then Abessias. So it gives us an interesting perspective on what could be an alternative European influence, actually, on what the constituent power was in developing the doctrine. Okay, I'll move on from that. So I'll just leave that open for discussion. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with her views. So I'll just go on to the question of how this doctrine has developed outside India. So although the idea of the basic structure doctrine is present in a number of South Asian jurisdictions, the extent to which I'll focus primarily on South Asia, by the way, because there's no time for anything else. So I'll just look at how the extent the doctrine has been accepted or rejected, or the ways in which it has been applied in 2 or 3 jurisdictions, and actually they vary considerably how the doctrine has been accepted by the Supreme Court in these jurisdictions. So a thorough understanding of the basic structure jurisprudence, which Rose and I calls a migrating constitutional ideal, actually requires very nuanced forms of judicial analysis in different jurisdictions. I don't think we'll have time for that. So I'll very briefly kind of refer to Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, and then leave it open for discussion. So in Bangladesh, for instance, Supreme Court in the case of Bangladesh versus Azaduzzaman Siddiqui, 2017, applies the basic structure doctrine by invalidating actually a provision that was in the original 1972 constitution of Bangladesh. So the 1972 constitution actually talks about removal of judges by presidential order under Article 96. This provision of the 1972 constitution was actually repealed in 1979 by the Fifth Amendment, and it was replaced by the Supreme Judicial Council, consisting of the Chief Justice and 2 senior-most appellate division judges. So the previous method of removal was substituted by the SJC. This provision was subsequently reintroduced but this original constitution provision, that is the presidential order, removal by a presidential order, was subsequently reintroduced by the 16th Amendment in 1914. So in Siddiqui's case, the Bangladesh, the court justified its decision largely on the basis that the basic structure doctrine had been explicitly inserted into the Constitution in 2011 by the 15th Amendment. So they kind of reverse the decision to introduce something that was there in the original 1972 Constitution by referring to the 15th Amendment of the Constitution, which they say introduces the concept of a basic structure in Bangladesh. So the basic structure doctrine in Bangladesh has been used to invalidate an amendment that seeks to reintroduce a provision in the original Constitution of 1972, and they do so by reference to the 15th Amendment, which introduces the basic structure doctrine and restores the 1972 Constitution. So we can go more into details about the 15th Amendment, because it's looked upon as a dismemberment amendment, which completely kind of breaks away from the previous regimes of martial law and emergency and so on, and tries to restore the 1972 Constitution. And also, just by the small aside, previously in Hussain versus Bangladesh Italian Marble Works 2009 case, the Supreme Court had observed that the SJC mechanism, which was introduced in 1979, constituted part of and reinforced judicial independence. So this judgment further held that judicial independence within the Constitution's basic structure is actually is part of the BSD doctrine. So there was this previous precedent, but the court in Siddiqui's case kind of carries it further. There is also the, we'll move on now to the Supreme Court of Pakistan, and the issue there also involves the question of executive influence in the appointment and removal of judges and so on, along with other issues. The Supreme Court of Pakistan has not formally accepted that the Constitution embodies an implied unamendable structure, but the court, for the first time in Muhammad Khan Achakzai versus Federation of Pakistan, 1997, notes that all of Pakistan's past and present constitutions share the same preamble, which was based on the Objectives Resolution, which was adopted by the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan in March 1949. So therefore, the court reasoned that its parliament was only free to amend any part of the Constitution if the salient features and basic characteristics of the Objectives Resolution were left untouched. Such unamendable salient features could include federalism, parliamentary democracy, and Islamic provisions, including independence of the judiciary. While the Mahmood Khan case expressly rejected existence of a basic structure doctrine in Pakistan, actually its endorsement of the salient features doctrine in substance allows the court to operationalize the basic structure doctrine in all but name in Pakistan. At issue in that case was the 8th Amendment, which authorized the president to dissolve the National Assembly in his discretion, where, in his opinion, a situation had arisen in which the government could not be carried on in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution, and an appeal to the electorate was necessary. To conserve its institutional capital, the court asserted that its newfound powers would be, it didn't actually fully assert its BSD powers. So while carving out a role for itself to examine whether any future constitutional amendments violated the salient features, the court actually avoided a confrontation with the other branches by actually upholding the 8th Amendment. So the next BSD case is called Wukala Mahaz Barai versus Federation of Pakistan, 1998. And the constitutionality of the 14th Amendment was before the Supreme Court in this case. So the court reaffirms Mahmood Khan and declares that any constitutional amendment could not violate the salient features and basic characteristics of the Objectives Resolution. The court in this case held that the 14th Amendment, which sought to end party defections by legislators and which inserted Article 630A(6), which empowered the head of a political party to discipline his party members, was actually, it was constitutional, but they kind of read it down. So there was an ouster clause also in the 14th Amendment, which was added to bar judicial review over any legal proceedings in relation to this amendment. So though the court did not invalidate the amendment, 6 out of 7 judges did read down the ouster clause. and 4 judges on the panel went on to read down the effect of Clause A of the explanation to Article 63A1 and held that Clause A did not apply to the legislator's conduct or breach of discipline outside of Parliament, and it should also be read in a way that preserves the right of freedom of speech of a member of the House subject to reasonable restrictions. The salient features doctrine was again applied in Munir Hussain Bhatti versus Federation of Pakistan in 2011, where the 19th Amendment was in question. So the 19th Amendment was passed to require the Parliamentary Committee to provide reasons to be recorded when it rejects judicial nominees put forward by the Judicial Commission. The Judicial Commission and the Parliamentary Committee were first created by the 18th Amendment in 2010, but the Parliament Committee was not required to furnish reasons for rejecting judicial nominees then. The Supreme Court upholds the 19th Amendment in form, but it overturned it in substance by determining that the Parliamentary Committee had no discretion to reject the appointment of judicial nominees put forward by the Judicial Committee, as that would encroach upon judicial independence. In 2015, the constitutionality of the 18th Amendment was again upheld in District Bar Association versus Federation of Pakistan. According to Justice Azmat Saeed, who wrote the lead opinion, the 18th Amendment did not violate the salient features, but that was only because it had been revised by the 19th Amendment and the court's interpretation in Munir Hussain. So Justice Saeed reasoned that the independence of the judiciary is a salient feature of the Constitution, and the litmus test for the independence of the judiciary qua the appointment of the judges appears to be that the power to initiate and the primacy of decisiveness with regard to the final outcome of the process must vest in the Chief Justices and the members of the judiciary. So in Pakistan, the basic structure doctrine has been termed the salient features doctrine, and it has been used cautiously by the Supreme Court in view of the political context, including martial law. It has applied the doctrine in essence, while never really striking down a constitutional amendment. It has used the doctrine to read down or interpret amendment provisions in such a way as to conform to the Constitution's essential features. I just have one more reference to Sri Lanka and then I'm done. The idea in Sri Lanka was that the basic structure doctrine of the Constitution cannot be amended as developed. The idea that basic structure doctrine of the Constitution as developed in the Kesavananda Bharati case could be applied in Sri Lanka. That idea was actually not accepted by the court in the 13th Amendment case of 1987. So the 13th Amendment actually in Sri Lanka proposed a detailed scheme for the devolution of power, including the establishment of provincial councils in Sri Lanka. And in challenging the constitutionality of this amendment, the petitioners tried to rely on the concept of a basic structure in the Sri Lankan constitution. In Sri Lanka, actually, the way the constitution is set up is that any proposed amendment to the constitution, to any of the entrenched clauses in Article 83 of the Constitution, has to be approved not only by a 2/3 vote in Parliament, but also by the people in a referendum in certain cases. So there can be certain amendments which just require a 2/3 vote. Certain amendments to certain other provisions require a referendum by the people as well. And actually, it is the court which has to kind of make a decision whether the amendment is in reference to these entrenched provisions, which requires a further referendum by the people. So the provisions for the office of the executive president are not entrenched, but it was argued in this case that although not entrenched, the scheme for the exercise of executive power by the president and the cabinet cannot be amended without a referendum, as it was part of the basic structure of the Sri Lanka's constitution. Having considered the Sri Lankan constitution against the Indian one, the majority of the Supreme Court held that in that case that the basic structure doctrine was not applicable in the Sri Lankan context. So the court actually reasoned that the express definition of constitutional amendment and the provision for entrenched clauses in the Sri Lankan constitution actually does not, there's no room left for a basic structure doctrine because it's already spelled out. The definition of a constitutional amendment, entrenched clauses, they're already there in the constitution itself. However, in reviewing the constitutionality of two subsequent constitutional amendments, the Supreme Court has adopted the reasoning that seems very similar to the basic structure doctrine. And the two cases are the cases called In Re, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, 2002, and there is also another case where the court there's also a reference with regard to the 20th Amendment to the Constitution in 2020. So in both these cases, there was a reference made to the basic structure doctrine. There was a similar approach that was adopted by the court. So the court basically holds that although the provisions that were amended were not really entrenched provisions, they were sufficiently important in terms of the structure of the Constitution to merit a referendum to the people. So in the relevance of the Indian concept was rejected by the early courts, but it seems to have been kind of implied in later cases that the Supreme Court in Sri Lanka has decided upon. So that was the three jurisdictions I wanted to refer to. And so, yeah, I'll leave it there. There are references, of course, to Malaysia, Kenya, Israel as well, where the doctrine has been applied, but I'll just leave that to questions.
Right. Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so very much. I am aware that we've sort of gone a little bit over time. And before I come to my closing remarks, and I know that Dr. Bhatia has other engagements, and I'm very thankful to him that he found the time so in the middle of things to be here. As Professor Baxi said, a lot of law students don't really read the judgment. I did not until I met Professor Baxi, and I've been reading it ever since. I think I'm 70% through. I'll just ask for a couple of sentences in remarks from all three of my panelists about the importance of reading the judgment, and if you could, the way that law students should read the judgment to sort of understand the actual implications, the impact, the significance of this judgment. And I would go to Dr. Bhatia first because I know that he has to leave early.
I'm not going to comment on this importance of reading judgments in general, because I think presently, specifically, that's like, I mean, I wouldn't even recommend that, because this is like they write far too much, and far too much is irrelevant. So everyone has to find their own way of engaging with present day judgments in a way that, gives you what it's about, but also you don't waste your time, reading stuff that is completely relevant. But it is, I think, important to read Kesavananda Bharati, all opinions, because I think that it was a case that required that degree of length. The issues were that complex. They go into like the entire history of implied limitations from the late 19th century, and there are a range of issues. I think that each judgment has a slightly different approach to the issue. And so it actually was a case where they weren't just repeating themselves to get to the same conclusion. They had different approaches. And through those approaches, you understand, I think, the many different perspectives you can get on something as complex as constitutional amendments and constitutional change. And of course, it's important to read it because the final ratio is like 6.5, right? The famous 6.5, where Justice Khanna agrees on the basic structure, but disagrees on implied limitations. And I think that is important, because in now, if you're trying to say deploy something like in implied limitations in the case, you have to understand what exactly Kesavananda said about it, so you know that you aren't doing it wrongly. So I think that reading that judgment is important. It will take some time, but I think the complexity and the nuances in the judgments reflect the complexity of the issue. And the only way to really understand that is to go over the judgments and see what they were doing in some detail.
And I do agree, sir. I think Professor Sen has very, very nicely and very briefly actually showed us how actually your hypothesis of the courts wielding this basic structure when it's actually about their own powers. We've seen that happen in Bangladesh and Pakistan now, when the moments in which they use the basic structure, the salient features doctrine is essentially when judicial independence is threatened. But sort of building more on the importance of reading this judgment, which was my main intention. I wanted to sort of ignite that conversation among students about the importance of reading it, not just sort of for Con Law 1, but also in terms of the jurisprudential understandings of Indian law. I'll move to Professor Chandra for her closing remarks.
I agree with everything that Gautam said, and something that Professor Baxi said early on. That's not just about constitutional law, but very fundamentally about political theory, about jurisprudence. And so, I mean, there are different ways of approaching the case, and I absolutely recommend reading this thoroughly and engaging with each judgment separately. But let me just take that the time that I have to make a connection. This goes to Professor Sen's intervention, that actually there's a interesting sort of link between the Indian basic structure doctrine and Pakistan's and Pakistani jurisprudence. So in Sajjan Singh, which of course predates even Golaknath, Justice Mudolkar, who first starts articulating, so on the question of whether fundamental rights can be amended or not, on that question he is in a minority in Sajjan Singh, but he also for the first time introduces this idea of basic structure. And if I may just take a minute to read a paragraph from that judgment of Justice Mudholkar's, he says, again, this is going back to something Professor Baxi was saying, that we know if parliamentarians are taking the oath of office and they're saying that they're going to uphold the constitution, what does that mean for them being able to completely amend the constitution, right? So he says, if upon a literal interpretation of this provision, Article 368, an amendment even of the basic features of the Constitution would be possible, it will be a question for consideration as to how to harmonize the duty of allegiance to the Constitution with the power to make an amendment of it. Could the two be harmonized by excluding from the procedure of amendment alteration of the basic feature of the Constitution? Where is he getting this idea from? He says, it would be of interest to mention that the Supreme Court of Pakistan has in Mr. Fazlul Qadar Chaudhary versus Muhammad Abdul Haq held that franchise and form of government are fundamental features of a constitution, and the power conferred upon the president by the Constitution of Pakistan to remove difficulties does not extend to making an alteration in the fundamental features of the constitution. And then he looks at Justice Cornelius's judgment, the Chief Justice of Pakistan, so on and so forth. And from that, he says, perhaps there is this kind of an implied limitation in the, or this kind of a restriction in the Indian constitution as well, but that was not sort of directly relevant, so he doesn't necessarily go into it. So just to say that I think there are also circularities here, so of where we get our ideas of basic structure from, or at least the progenitors of that idea. A final point just to say that I completely again agree with Gautam's analysis of the EWS case. My own small intervention was with respect to Justice Bela Trivedi's opinion, where she's no longer using basic structure as a shield, but I would say as a sword, to say that in the future we need to move away from group affiliation, group identity-based affirmative action, because what equality under the Constitution demands as part of the basic structure of the Constitution is a casteless society, and that can only happen if the Constitution stops providing caste-based or group affiliation-based affirmative action. So the idea that, I mean, of basic structure as a shield is very well taken, but I fear that that we are seeing increasingly the use of the basic structure doctrine as a sword, not just in terms of seeing where constitutional amendments are permitted or not, but for a range of other features. And absolutely, finally, to your point about the self-interested use of the basic structure doctrine, I was counting recently that there have been 8 times that a constitutional amendment has been struck down by the Indian Supreme Court. Once because appropriate procedure was not followed, they should have followed the proviso, they followed the main part of Article 368. 7 times for basic structure violations. Each time, the provision, the part that has been struck down is the part that has curtailed the power of judicial review of the courts. So just leaving that out there.
Thank you so much. I think you've done way more than leaving it just out there. I know for sure that I'm going to have a lot of research article ideas emanating from this hour-and-a-half long discussion. I'll move quickly to Professor Sain and her concluding remarks on of course, Dr. Bhatia's remarks, Professor Chandra's remarks, and of course, maybe also sort of help us understand how it might be easier for students to read this judgment. It seems too difficult. It seems like an insurmountable mountain of sorts. But Professor Sain.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely agree with most of the comments which were made by all the other panelists. So, my concern is that as Aparna was also mentioning, it the very vagueness of the judgment kind of leaves it open to capture. It leaves it open to the carving out of exceptions, and having to read through pages of decisions by so many judgments makes it difficult to kind of arrive at an understanding of what the doctrine really amounts to and how it should be applied in future cases. So we've seen that other jurisdictions have actually dealt with it very cautiously. They've either relied on express provisions in the Constitution, or they have kind of not applied the doctrine and struck down any amendments. So I don't know if there is any kind of lessons that we can learn from the way the other jurisdictions have actually used this doctrine in a more restrained way. And also, as Paulson mentioned, to kind of primarily uphold the rule of law rather than kind of asserting any kind of major constituent power that exists. It's a vague, mystical concept which exists alongside the Constitution, by reference to which they're kind of justifying this particular doctrine. So trying to kind of structure it in some way is required, I think, for it to gain some legitimacy. I don't know if you agree with that or not. There is a need for that, I guess, in the political context, but how do you structure it more rigorously, I think, is and also conceptually.
Thank you so much, Professor. And I think we will conclude this panel discussion, this conference, with the person who had the first word in, Professor Baxi. So may I come to you for your concluding remarks?
Oh, well, I'm very enriched by what has gone on, and I've taken huge notes, and I recognize much of what has been said from comparative perspectives are very important. We call it COCOS. COCOS in my oxymoron stands for, like oxymoron, stands for comparative constitutional studies. So I think Dr. Sen gave us a very good, Aparna also mentioned this, that it's very important to compare the judicial performance on basic structure across nations. And Rosnai has just done a very nice book on unconstitutional constitutional amendments, which covers the entire globe. So this is very interesting. I would only say about the hollowing out, the fear apprehension is justified, always. There were people on the eminent lawyers also, and judges who felt that Justice Gajendra told me in private, I can safely break if there was any confidence. Chief Justice Gajendra, I was a rookie law teacher. When he called me aside in a supper house seminar and said, Baxi, you know what has Supreme Court done in Goloknath? Terrible. And never forget, and this was his word, never forget this is a self-inflicted wound from which the Gautam may be quite right in saying Goloknath is not so much a self-inflicted. If it was a wound, it has been redressed by a basic structure. And I agree with it in many ways. But I think if it is the case, and it's the case since day one of the Indian Constitution, the Supreme Court has believed in presumption of constitutional validity of parliamentary action. So the other side had to make a case that it is not a reasonable section or it's this or that. And only upon that evidence being led and being found conclusive that the burden of proof passes on the state. This is and the court has ruled also from day one that the mere possibility of abuse of power is no ground for not conferring power in the first place. So it is acceptable jurisprudence. There is also Patanjali Shastri say that legislature appreciates the best and the most the needs of the people and making laws and policies. And it's entitled to the highest respect. History of the basic structure, as this discussion has revealed, and many other discussions show, has been a by and large an affirmation of vast powers in the executive and the legislature, even in administration. So separation of powers in that sense is alive and well. There is no, what we to understand is the frequent and periodic outburst of parliamentary sovereignty. What I'm not really able to understand is what political purposes it serves from different times and at different times and places. And that's a question for political science and law to legal studies to understand in depth what purposes did it serve in the Nehru period, what purpose it served in the Gandhi period, and later. The study of political purposes is very important in thinking about hollowing out. And a scholar need not take a position on political purposes, but certainly can take a position on hollowing out from within the apprehension. So I think it's been a very good discussion. There are a number of other points which the time does not allow us. And fatigue also sets in after a certain time, even with a good discussion and an excellent comparing. So I think I'll end here by accepting to say that if anyone takes the position that only salvation for a democratic regime lies in the idea of basic structure of constitutionalism, therefore, basic structure idea must be more robust to act as a savior of the nation. If anyone takes a view that's an excessive faith in one organ of the state or other organs of state, and what is more than organ of state, great faith in a few human beings whose turnover in the office is far greater than any other walk of life. You look at the turnover of judges, the turnover of prime ministers, of members of parliament, of the state legislature, governors, etc. It is much, much faster. So if we take the velocity of this tenure into account, or turnover factor, then you find that place so much faith in robustness of judicial review is perhaps a mistake. Answer to slow or quick democide lies elsewhere, not only, or at least does not wholly lie with judges and court. As Gautam Bhatia said, I think he's right, and as comparative experience also illustrates. But in the interregnum, what the courts can do to strengthen the foundation of constitution is very valuable all this day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Baxi, and thank you so much, Professor Aparna, Chandra, Professor Sarbani, Sen, and Dr. Gautam Bhatia, who's had to sort of move out of the meeting for another commitment. And thank you to everybody who joined in today. I know it's a Saturday morning. And yes, the recording of this lecture will be available on YouTube, on the Jindal Global University's YouTube page. You can, of course, refer to it whenever you want to. And for any other queries about it, please feel free to drop me an email. It's always in the bottom of the brochure. But once again, thank you so much to everybody who's joined in for your time, for your patience, and to those who were our panelists for your commitment to not only constitutional law, but also the basics of doctrine, and also to sort of educating younger minds about the importance of the same. And I hope that on 24th of April, which is a Monday, you all take out some time and just reflect upon the massive impact that this doctrine has had on the development of our democratic systems in India. Thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful weekend ahead. Bye-bye.